Welcome to the May DACA membership meeting. Today we have Carter Winton from Source Allies, who is going to present to us on their marketable skills in QA. Just a couple quick things. I know usually in June we have a social event. I don't know that what we'll do next month. I know that some places are open. I don't know how many people are up for actually doing a in-person get together, chit chat, catch up since we haven't seen each other for over a year. So we'll kind of talk about that and see what we want to do with that and go from there with that thought and see if anybody has any interest in that. Um, I think that's about all I really have to say. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Carter, and he can go ahead and start his presentation.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, and thank you, DACA. Excited to be here, right? Like I don't do presentations all that much, but I have a lot of fun putting them together. So hopefully you enjoy this as much as I enjoyed putting it together. And what I'm going to talk about is just, the skill sets that I come across when it comes to QA and the different roles that are involved with QA. Why me? Why am I presenting? Well, I've got 14 years approximately of recruiting experience. I've recruited for all sorts of technical roles. And I currently work for Source Allies, which is a software development company, consultancy, where we assist local partners here in the Des Moines area build software. That software is obviously tested. And I believe, and the company firmly believes, good code is tested. I should warn you, these thoughts are my own. They are not Source Allies, so I'm wearing a Source Allies shirt, but the things that I say may not be seconded by even people like my teammate Nick Kringle, who's on this call today. But I go so far as to say that good code is tested, and if your code isn't tested, it's probably not that good. So that's my philosophy there. Here, what this talk isn't. It's not going to be very technical. So if you were coming to learn about how to use Selenium or, in what instances you should use Cypress or something like that, that's not this talk. I'll prepare you right there. What it isn't is therapy. I'm not a psychiatrist, right? Like I can give you my thoughts. I can talk to you about your thoughts. But if you're coming for solutions here, again, maybe not the right spot. Lastly, this isn't done by somebody in your profession, right? You all are the professionals here. You are the ones that do this day in, day out. I work with a lot of you. So I see the things that I talk to the managers, I talk to the directors, I talk to organizations, I talk to developers about what they want to see in roles like yours. And then I obviously have some really talented quality engineers on my team that I like to talk to about what they're doing and learn from them. So that's what this talk isn't. It's also not an individual presentation, right? I want to encourage as much participation as possible because I do want to make sure that you all get something out of this. And I'm going to try something a little new, at least for me in a presentation, in a couple slides where I hope to get your input, learn from everybody what's happening on their end. All right, so there's a lot of roles in QA, and I say the general quality assurance QA, right? You have QA tester, you have test analyst, you have QA engineer, you have an automation engineer, QA lead, QA director, right? Like all these different roles. I'm not going to talk about too many of them. What I'm going to focus on is automation and manual testing, right? I think they are very different roles. For insight into Source Allies. So Source Allies is an organization where we have about 100 people. 10 of us, 11 of us are in teammate services, which is the operational side of things. That means that 89 I'll round up, 90% of our company is involved with writing software. We don't have any specifically manual testers on the team. We have what I call quality engineers, folks that can write code, but they can also do some manual testing. I don't see, in my experience, I haven't seen a lot of manual testers that can do automation. I've seen automation testers that can do manual. I'd love to hear people's thoughts on that statement, though. Is that accurate? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? If not, we can keep moving. That's okay too.
I have manual testers that I'm working with on moving them towards being both automated and manual testing.
Actually, at one time I've done both manual and automated testing at the same time. So writing the scripts and
yeah, and both are very valid roles, right? Like there is a place in the world for everybody. We need manual testers, we need automation engineers, right? Like they're both necessary roles in my opinion. The thing that I want to stress for manual testers, just because we don't do a lot of it doesn't mean it's not done, right? Like that's kind of the point I want to make with this. What I do encourage manual testers to do is, lean into the strategy part of testing. I don't, in my opinion, I'm not sure how many test cases there are going to be over the course of a application's life cycle that are just, here's the test case. Make sure you write the scenario, the case, and it passes, right? Like get the 100% code coverage. I see that role transitioning from my perspective into that more of a strategist, right? You have to do the testing. You have to make sure the application works, but be the user advocate. Talk to the developers about how users will use the application. Don't just accept the test cases, right? Find out the why behind them. Why do we want to test it this way? What's the reasoning for that? What priorities do we have with this application? And ensure that you have the same takeaways and mutual understandings as not only the users, but as the developers as well. So I say lean into the strategy piece. I think there's a good deal of education that still needs to be done in this role, in this responsibility, because people kind of toss some of these things over the wall, right? Like I hear a lot of organizations that toss, here's my code, make sure it's right? Here's my feature, make sure it works. I believe in building bridges, not walls. So we want to break that down and collaborate as much as possible. With that said, the automation testing piece is what I see more of. And there's a lot of things you can do to get into it, but some people just don't care to learn code, and that's okay, right? Like you might not have to write a script as a manual tester. You probably will in automation, right? You might write some Python code. You might have to dive into some Java or something like that just to see where the code might be broken, how to write something else. You also have discretion in terms of what you automate. So there's that piece as well. I hear a lot of the automation testing pyramid, testing around APIs. That's something that's big for a lot of our clients. It's how do we know when an API breaks, right? That's the automated test you want to have catch. They're changing so frequently that applications and features that you're responsible for can be affected by something external, by an API that you touch. So, there's just more to it, in my opinion. But that's what I see. I also think that if I remember this article that I read, about 10 years ago, that the testing world was about 75% manual to 25% automation, and it's shifted to be almost exactly the reverse of that, right? So now it's about 75% automation with 25% manual. I think those are the jobs you'll see. So, go where the work is. If automation is the direction, then that's the direction I recommend. Well, let me go back for 1 second. If you aren't interested in learning programming languages or scripting or something like that, I highly encourage that mentorship and that leaning into the strategy, again, is what I call it, to think about testing, where you might be thinking, why you might be thinking it again. So, there are ways that you can make a bigger impact from giving more education, right? And again, that's something that we at Source Allies believe in, is teaching others and sharing our opinions and things like that with everybody. So yeah, whatever you can do to bring eyesight, to bring visibility to your role and to what you're testing, that's always going to help you be more marketable as a QA engineer. Now, there's also core competencies with all these things, right? Like with the role in general, and I think they are actually pretty similar for both manual and automation. And again, like, please, if you hear me say something that you disagree with, I would love to start the dialogue, right? So, some of these opinions might not be the most favorable to hear, I suppose, for some people on this call, but ultimately, I want to make sure that the discussion is available and that we can talk through. Along those lines, I'm not sure if my core skills are about right, but these are the core skills that I've found when I'm talking to teammates, to directors, and to other people that I know in the community. Your core skills in this field: translate user stories, acceptance criteria, process diagrams, things like that. Other non-functional requirements into test cases, and perform execution of those tests. Does that sound right to people?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Very cool. The other thing that I think is a core strategy or a core skill: drive the strategy of the thing under the test by preparing and communicating those test plans, those test results, the test gaps. What might we be missing, right? So even thinking of that is something that I think is the kind of thing that you want to make people aware of. The last piece is assist the team with maintaining an effective management process and continuous improvement. By that, I mean, what do you do when you find the bugs, right? There's a process in there somewhere. How do we hold true to that process? How do we ensure that everybody has an understanding of what our process is as a team? This is the slide that I wanted to get your thoughts on, because I wanted to be somewhat useful to everybody. Is tools, right? Like, not everything is a hammer. You can't, as much as I love home improvement, not everything can be done with just a hammer. So I was hoping to get everybody's thoughts on what tools they use and see if I could write them up here kind of in real time. Just so I can give you guys something to walk away with that might be tools that you can look in. We've got about 10, 2, 4, 6, 8 people on the call, something like that. What are some of the things you all are using in your day-to-day if you are in a testing role, right? Like, I think of things like Selenium. It's not coming up here. I'll have to refresh the slides for you. But things like Selenium is what I think of. I think of Cypress. I mentioned both of these earlier. JUnit, NUnit, right? Like, I still hear those words.
I use Tosca and Hexawise.
Did you say Flasker?
Tosca. TOSCA.
TOSCA.
And Hexawise, which is a risk-based analysis of your test cases to determine what are the most high priority cases to test and bring the most value to your testing.
Awesome. Like, what you're saying is kind of solidifying what I what I said in the previous slide. That makes me feel good. Thanks for the validation, Mike.
Oh, anytime, man.
Does anybody else have any tools that we haven't mentioned? Are you using anything that you find really helpful? Dusty, you're on there. What are you using?
I'm typing up a bunch of them in the chat. So I'm using Azure DevOps, Chrome DevTools. DevTools in Firefox or Chrome, either one. Use Postman a little bit, VS Code. I mean, I'm really just looking at code. I do a lot of code reviews, so being active and looking at the actual code is important.
Yeah, this is great. This is great. Thanks, everybody, for that. I have the chat up, so appreciate that. That helps me get there for the future.
Carter, I'd add mine in the chat just so you could, even though I sent them to you, I add them in the chat.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Okay.
So those are some of the tools. Thank you all for adding that in there, right? Like, and what might work for you might not work for somebody else. That's okay, right? Like, I firmly believe that the right tool in the right situation, that's also something that is important for everybody, is that you have, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself in the slides, that you have the right, recommendation even. So like what somebody might have mentioned in here might be valuable to somebody that's at a different company or something like that. I think that even that cross collaboration is important, right? It's good to know these things. It's good to attend things like DAC and get this kind of discussion going. When I mentioned kind of that strategy or that process, like understanding what you're going to do when you find bugs even, right? Like, hold the vision and trust the process. One of the things that I like talking to one of my teammates about was every application has some process of getting from source control to the user. There has to be a process, right? Like, how do you test that? That deployment system, what is that? That's CI/CD, right? Like, how do you fit your tests within that? How do you provide visibility into that process? You don't want to be the only one watching it, right? Like, you want other people involved. I talk about this a lot. It's usually in regards to like a system administrator or something along those lines, right? Like the holding the keys to the castle. You want multiple people to have those keys, right? So that if you ever win the lottery and just don't come to work the next day, that application is still going to be able to work just fine, because the team that you help talk to and collaborate with is going to be able to tell you all the tests that are in there, why this test didn't get written, why this portion of the code base isn't tested, right? I also think there's an importance in there too, in understanding kind of those benchmarks of quality. Where do we test? Why might not we test in certain other areas? That's how you say that. If I'm writing an application that gets 1,000 users and one of those users every 30 days gets some error because they do something funky that they only do, does that part of the code need a test around it? Probably not, right? Like, probably not. Again, I say that because 100% test coverage is great, but 100% test coverage sometimes doesn't cover 100% of the tests. I'll actually get into that in my next slide here. And along that, you don't have to be the expert. Sorry, now I'm getting ahead of myself again. You don't have to be the expert on that process, on the source control to user, but you don't have to be the expert. You do have to be an advocate for it, right? You should be an advocate for that process. You should be an advocate for visibility into that process. Again, the what's, the whys, the hows they're tested. I said something about the 100% code coverage, and that doesn't necessarily mean 100% of the tests are 100% of the code coverage. 100% of test coverage doesn't mean that 100% of the code is covered. Be curious, right? Like, I think that in your nature, and everybody on this call's nature, You are curious, right? Like this is it, and it's really funny to me that I'm the one saying this because I am not a what if person. You know, I'd like to give my wife as an example, but I'm being recorded, so I'll think of something different. I don't like what if questions, right? Like a lot can happen. The thing is, like, that's who I am. You all are those people that say, what if this? Right? So I think it's just amusing that I'm the person that says this up here because I don't think that way, but that's because it's all of you that do. And if something is 100% coverage, if you haven't seen a bug come across in a week, in a month, why is that? What am I missing, right? Like, what aren't we doing, or what are we doing that's so well, and how do I repeat that in other code bases, right? So I think there's an inherent curiosity for everybody on this call that is one of those marketable skills. You know, I've said this piece a lot already. Collaboration is key, right? This is one of those things that I truly feel like stands out. I said it earlier. I believe in building bridges, not walls, right? We should be doing that in software development as much as possible. Working with the developers, working with the stakeholders, sharing information freely to ensure that you understand it. One of the things that I do in sales, in recruiting, to make sure that I have a full understanding in talking to others, including my wife, right? Like my family, I repeat back the questions to ensure that I've understood it correctly, or summarize it and say it back. Is that what I'm getting? Right? These are the things that I feel like we should be doing regularly. And these are the responsibilities that I think fall a lot on this group, right? Because you are the ones trying to understand the requirements, trying to understand the important pieces, where the tests need to be, what they need to cover. You know, and then with collaboration, obviously that you're building trust, right? You're able to ensure that the developers know that they're not going to be able to sneak something by you, or that you're going to catch the things that you should catch. The users know that you're looking out for them, that they're going to get a good application at the end because you're their user advocate, right? So there's trust there. There's innovation in that collaboration. The more you talk to people, right, the more ideas flow. So, you know, what a great skill to have is to be able to draw ideas out of people, right? I'm trying to do it with you all right now. There's no secret to what I do. I'm trying to get you guys to collaborate with me here today and give me tools and things like that, right? Like, I would even love to hear you all talk about stories of collaboration, you know, the big wins. And this all leads to a greater point that I'm trying to make with this talk, is these wins and this collaboration are the stuff that when you are marketing your skills, those are going to be the things that you talk about, right? You have something like, I'm looking at Postman and VS Code, right? Like, those are the tools you use. If I'm in a position of hiring and I hear you say those tools, I'll be like, that's great. You got those tools down. Now tell me something that you've done with those specific tools. And I think that, going back to my roles slide earlier, you also need to understand that some of these folks that are now in positions of hiring aren't doing the testing on a level that you are regularly, but they can resonate. You can tell stories that resonate with them. So, you know, that innovation comes, and that's where you get these big win stories, I think, right? Like, how did you get the developer to recognize that miss? How did you get the user to say, that's how I use it, so I'll write the test around that specific function or feature? And communication is paramount in all of this, right? Like, it's, as we're seeing right now, with everybody pretty much remote. If you're back at the office, like, good for you. I'm excited to be there with my teammates too. You know, I think that those water cooler conversations can lead to a lot, and communication is just one of those things that everybody needs. In fact, I even stress over communication. I think that when you are specifically in like an interview or something like that, right? Because this is QA skills to be marketable. If you are interviewing, I talk about over communication. I want you to over communicate with your teammates that you're working with today, because you want them to say, I've got enough information. You don't want them to come to you, 3-4 days later saying, where's this thing? What happened to this? You want them to know all of that to the point that they're like, I'm good. Thanks for everything that you told me, Katie, right? Like, hey, you've given me a lot of good insight on that test strategy, so I'm good. That's a big piece of this too, right? Like that communication part is a massive skill set. I've even gotten into a dialogue, we'll call it, with somebody on LinkedIn because I don't like the term soft skills. And I don't like it just because I think that adjective is too weak of an adjective for skills that are so important in your day-to-day role, right? Like I know it's the opposite of hard skills, and the hard skills are being able to use Postman, being able to write tests, being able to write requirements, things like that. I get the difference there. It's just, I think it does a disservice in strength of those skills. So, think of those skills, and when it comes to the marketing of yourself, right? Like be able to tell those stories, talk about the wins that you've had. Again, being able to use tools or list tools on your resume, that's great, and that's imperative to getting you the right job. But to win that interview, you're going to be able to have to talk about a time when you used it and what's something unique to your usage of it, or how you used it in a way that resonates with the person sitting across from you. Does all that make sense to everybody? I'll take silence. Silence is agreement. Right? Like, and it's hard. Like, this is exactly my point with communication, right? Like, I miss the body language, right? Like, I miss seeing people's faces because I can't tell if you guys are playing on your phones or actually listening to me or not. But it seems like communication is always going to be the one thing that we absolutely must do with one another, especially in a role like this. Along those lines, when you are looking for that next role, you have a lot of friends online. Indeed is a great resource. If for some reason, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great resource. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile, right, like that's Facebook for work. You should have one. You should connect with people. You should be able to find people that you work with today, so you can keep them in your network for tomorrow. One of my tricks that I'll share with you all is, when you're searching for that next job in a role that you have, you can find who the QA manager is, or the director of quality assurance, or whatever their title is, the QA lead, who might be looking at your resume, and you can message them saying, I just applied online, please check out my resume, right? LinkedIn is a great tool for that. So, market yourself there, and don't be humble about it. Marketing yourself, there's a fine line between, humble and arrogant. You don't want to be humble on LinkedIn, right? Like, show all the things that you've done. Now, the key there for LinkedIn profiles is you want to give people enough insight into your skills and abilities that they're curious for more. And that's when you get to tell them the story about how you used Insomnia or Tosca or Hexawise, right? So put those up there, maybe put a blurb about how you used it one time, but not enough of the story where they don't need to call you and ask you about it. Google's your friend. Shoot, I wouldn't have been able to put this presentation together without Google. I looked into a bunch of marketable skills for QA, specifically for this talk today. It's where you find jobs, where you find companies you want to work for. These are all pretty straightforward things for me. Job boards are great. LinkedIn is a great job board as well. Indeed is good. There's plenty of them out there, and they all have a little bit different things. Some might have the same things, but they all have a little bit different too. So you want to be touching on all those, not from a marketing standpoint so much as from a market insight standpoint. You know, and I'll give a shout out to my friends over there at DACA. These are great too, right? Like, I wouldn't be giving this presentation if I didn't know the organizers of DACA. So, you know, being involved in things like this, I've seen people get jobs from going to user groups, from talking to folks, from asking interesting questions in a presentation. So don't discount the participation piece. You know, that also goes a long way in terms of your skills being marketed, right? There's about 10 of us on the call today. That means there's probably I don't know, 2,000 QA testers in Des Moines right now that aren't on this call, right? What a great thing to be able to tell your future interviewer that I participate in DACA. These are some of the people I've met. These are some of the people I've communicated with. I'm probably going to lean to the person that goes to these presentations over the person that doesn't when I'm in a hiring mode, because it shows that you're passionate about what you do. So that's my thoughts on.
It's funny that you say that, because I actually interviewed for a job once and was told that it was down to me, one other person. The reason I got the job was because of my involvement in professional development groups that set me a little step higher than the other person.
Right? Be proud of it. That's a great story, Mike. Thank you so much. You know, those are marketable skills. I'm on the Tech Association of Iowa Workforce Committee, to go back to kind of what I was saying earlier about Source Allies, right? Like, we lean more towards quality engineers, people that can write some code. There are a lot of great companies in Des Moines. There's a lot of great companies that look for specifically manual testers. That's, you know, you have opportunity. There will be opportunity for you. It might not be with us, and that's okay. I'm very proud of the Tech Association of Iowa's Workforce Committee, because we can provide outlets to everyone. You know, culture matters. And even along those lines, right, interviews are just as much your opportunity to interview the company as they are our opportunity to interview you. So, you know, be selective and find the right fit for you. I just spoke with somebody. I just had coffee with a friend. It's so nice to go out to a coffee shop and have coffee with them for the first time in, gosh, over 15 months. And she was talking about the red flags that she sees in an interview process, right? Like, lean team, massive user base, right? Oh, so that just made you overwork your dev team as much as possible, right? Like, that's what I heard with that statement, right? So think of those interviews as your opportunity as well. Let's see here. When it comes to resumes, right? Like, I always encourage you to have a foundation. What that means is, if you haven't touched your resume if you're like me and haven't touched your resume, I've been at Source Allies now for going on 7 years. If you haven't touched it since 2014, it's time to touch it, right? Like, I've had a lot of things happen to me in the last 7 years. I should probably have those written down on my resume. So just in case the dream job falls from the sky and I want to apply to it, I can't. So I highly encourage everybody in the vein of marketing to keep that thing updated. Now, you don't need to do it every week or every month, but you might want to take a look every 6 months just in case. Because when that job comes along, you want to be able to match the required skills, right? So it might be asking for, you know, specifically Tosca and Hexawise, and you don't have that on your resume, but now you can put it on there. You know, you're going to have to talk about how you use these things. So I am encouraging you all to be honest, right? Like, don't just see a job description and put all their words on there verbatim, even if you don't have them. Market yourself appropriately, right? Like, Get that base resume up there. Include the skills that you have done, that you know. You know, some of you might touch AWS, and you might be on the peripheral of it, but maybe you jump in to test an AWS service. If you do, having AWS on there is probably a good thing to have. Having that cloud stuff, right? Like Dusty said something about Azure DevOps, right? He might be touching Azure. Make sure you have that up there. The next company that you might want to work for might have a cloud environment that is Azure. So, you know, match those required skills when you find the job description that you like, but be honest about this whole thing, right? Like I will never encourage dishonesty. As you can tell from this talk today, I'm probably honest to a fault, so there's that too. That's really all I had for everybody. I've kind of jumped around quite a bit. So any questions on anything that I've said? Have I missed anything? Did you come in here asking, you know, wondering about something and I didn't touch on it? Can I answer that for anyone?
Now, Carter, I will ask you this. I had gone to, when I was back in the day when I worked at Principal, and they had the ever inevitable Black Thursday situation. And so we went to like a resume writing class thing, job interview thing for like afternoons. And they were saying that anytime that you learn a new marketable skill, you should update your resume for that. You know, so like if you like take some kind of certification at work, you know, then you should update your resume with that information. And that way, when, you know, the time comes that you need to throw your resume out there, you know, you don't have to sit back and think about all the different things that you've done either. Because I'm kind of like you. I haven't touched my resume in probably 5 years, you know, 4 years, something like that.
Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, and then you have to try to remember all those different things that you've done over that time, you know, so it makes it so much easier if you just, you know, do it at the time that you get those things, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think the timing is up to you, right? Like whenever you want to update your resume, you can, but make sure it's not like me and Mike apparently, right? Like don't wait.
We're slackers, man.
Right? Like, yeah. I mean, you know, it's funny because I actually talk about, you know, when I do recruiting, I talk about, you know, it's easier to try and get somebody to make a move that is underappreciated, underwhelmed, right? Like underengaged, potentially underpaid, things like that. It's easier to make that person make a move. When you see somebody like me that hasn't touched their resume in 6+ years, right? Like I'm comfortable. It's going to be hard for me to make, for you to get me to make a move, right? Like I'm pretty comfortable where I am. But that doesn't mean that I shouldn't be updating my resume, because when the time comes, right, I'm going to have to think back on 6 years of work and understand all the things that I've picked up. So I do encourage going back and updating your resume regularly. What that regularly is in the eye of the beholder, right? Like you could probably do it every 6 months. If you go to a class and you really like it and you picked up, you know, some random testing tool, sure, like write it down, but you're probably not going to be able to write what you've done with it until you really immerse yourself in it, which I think is probably every so often, right? Like every 6 months or so. So I always encourage at least checking it out, you know, at that time frame at the minimum. I'll throw my contact information up there too for you all.
I think you hit quite a lot of good stuff, Carter. And so
I mean, I went kind of all over the place, so I understand
okay.
that. I hope everybody kind of followed along a little bit. You know, and I apologize because I'm not technical, so I'm not going to be able to tell you like the exact things or resources to go to or tools to use in a certain environment. What I can tell you is what I look for in a teammate, right? And that's a lot of that you're competent at what your skill set is, right? Like you need to be able to tell me stories about how you have impacted an application, how you have tested a feature to make sure it works properly, how you've gotten your developers on board with the testing strategy. You know, a number of my teammates have developed like a testing pipeline that one of them wrote it in Python. I can't remember what another one did, right? Like, that's the cool story that I want to hear about. I want to hear about how you had a major impact on an organization, on a team. You know, I do shy away from the folks that say, I take the test, I run the test, and I make sure it passes, right? That's not the sell that I'm looking for.
And that's probably the mindset of most people that you're going to talk to about getting a job.
Yeah.
We actually had a programmer come in, and some of the developers on my line were interviewing them, and they asked them something about one particular thing, and their answer was, "I'm a contractor. Why would I do that?"
What a terrible answer.
Exactly. Well, yeah, guess what? She's not on my line. So.
You know, like, you want to find engaging work. You want to be tied to it. You want to be able to make an impact. I will say, like, if you don't want to do that, I still think there's a place for you, right? Like, I think it's in probably a larger organization that values, you know, heads down work a little bit more so than a lot of companies, or a lot of smaller companies. But, you know, if you have a passion for what you're doing, you're going to want to have that change, right? Like, you want to see the fruits of your labor. So yeah, find that impact.
Well, cool. Does anybody have any questions for Carter or anything like that before we break for this meeting? Well, like you, I will suggest that silence is so.
Yeah. Silence is agreement. Yeah. Thank you guys very much for letting me come
Thank
up
you very
here.
much, Carter, for doing your presentation today, and thanks for the information that you provided us. Again, keep an eye out on the LinkedIn and website for our upcoming June event, and hope everybody has a wonderful evening. Enjoy the nice weather before it rains tomorrow.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, Zach. I appreciate giving me the forum here to speak my mind.
Yeah, thanks, Carter.
All right.
Yeah, thanks.
Appreciate you.
All right. I'll catch you all later.
All right. Have a good one.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Bye.